Welcome to EasyViz Tableau Tips. This video will show you some tips for formatting messy line charts in Tableau. As a bonus, we'll even create a custom legend that can dynamically slice our line graph. At some point, we've all come across a Tableau dashboard with a line chart that looks like this. Line charts are great for comparing the trends over time across different categories, but by default, Tableau line charts can be messy and hard to read. So let's employ some clever formatting tricks to make these line charts a bit easier to read and use. I'll duplicate my line graph sheet, that way we can see a before and after. Then I'm going to remove these labels for now and we'll re-add them in later. Next, let's remove these dots on the lines. We'll go to color and we'll change the marker type to straight line. Next, we'll create some customizable versions of those same markers by dragging our measure, which is profit, over to the rows column again. And then we're going to merge these two graphs by turning the second one into a dual axis. Then we're going to change this to be circles. And now we have completely customizable markers. As you can see, we can increase the size or we can decrease the size. Having so many markers everywhere is quite messy, so I really just want to show the markers at the start and end of these lines. First, we need to create a function that filters the dates of our graph. In my example, I'm just going to check if the order date year is in 2019 or 2020, but any function that filters the dates would work. If you want all of your dates, you can just replace this with a true. We're going to call this date filter. Next, we'll need a function that identifies the start and the end of our line graph. To do this, we're going to use an LOD function. This function looks a bit complicated, but it's quite straightforward. It's basically just checking if the month of the order date is equal to the minimum of the order date within our date filter, and whether the month of the order date is the maximum of the order date within our date filter. And if that's the case, it's going to return a 1, otherwise it will return a 0. And I will call this date min max. By default, it creates this as a measure, so I just want to convert it to dimension. Let's have a look at what this LOD function actually does by looking at it as a table. Let's start with our date filter, then we'll put in our order date, and finally our LOD. Then we'll put in the filter to only show our date range. So all our LOD function is doing is checking whether the month of the order date falls within the first month where the date filter is true, or falls within the last month of the date filter is equal to true. You can see everywhere else, our function is returning 0. Now let's apply this LOD to our graph to see what happens. We're going to drag our LOD calculation into size, and we'll apply our date filter. And you can see now we only have markers at the start and end. We actually have markers all the way through, but they're kind of hidden by the line. There's two ways we can adjust the size of these markers. I want to make these markers in between a little bit more hidden, so I can adjust the size over here to be a bit smaller. Then these end markers are a bit small, so I can adjust the size over here to make it a little bit bigger. It's a bit too big, so we'll edit the size again down over here. And that's looking great and nice and clean. The next thing I like to do is make my line a little bit thinner. I always like to synchronize my axes just to ensure that our markers and our lines never get out of sync. Next, let's add some labels to the line ends. Drag your measure into the labels box. We definitely don't want to show every single label, so we'll change this to only show it at the line ends. Then, we don't want them to overlap, so we're going to uncheck allow labels to overlap other marks. We're going to align this to be horizontally centered, and now we have some nice neat labels. Next, let's take advantage of Tableau's highlighting function to label the graph that's highlighted. Select your circle marks, then drag your measure into labels, and we'll change this to only show when highlighted, and we won't allow it to overlap either. Now you can see when I click each region and highlight them, all of the intra labels will show up. I usually like to make these a little bit smaller. Let's format, and change the font size to 8. And I like to make it a little bit lighter by selecting a slightly lighter shade of black. Now that we have our main labels and all our intro labels when highlighting, we really don't need these axes anymore. So right click, show header, and right click, show header. While we're at it, let's get rid of the title on this axis. Let's also clean up some of these grid lines. Right click, format. For our columns in the border section, let's remove the column divider. That'll remove the two side lines over here. Then in our rows, for the grid lines, we'll remove the actual grid lines. Let's drop this into our dashboard and compare it to our old line graph. Let's make it the same size and get rid of this. We can see with a few clever formatting tricks, we've created a much more legible line graph. When we select specific regions, it's a lot more cleaner and easier to read than our old graph above. Another thing I really don't like, and this isn't just specific to line graphs, is these legends. The default Tableau legend has very few formatting options. You can't even center it. So to remedy this, we're going to have to create our own legend. Make a new worksheet and label it appropriately. I'll call mine legend. Drag your dimension into the columns panel, drag your dimension into the color panel, and change your mark to square if it isn't already. Since you're using a sheet to create your legend, you can actually format this however you like. I'm going to keep it simple. Let's hide this field label for columns. Then we'll right click format. And we will just simply remove these row dividers. Make sure you disable tooltips so that when you hover over your legend, nothing actually pops up. Now let's add this legend into our dashboard. So we'll just drag our legends over here for now. We will hide the title and make it fit the entire view. I like my legend between the graph and the title. So to do this, we'll hide the title on the actual sheet and we'll make our own. Make the title a bit bigger and centered. And give it a nice gray background like the other one. Make it a little bit wider. And then we'll drag our legend in between our graph and our title. While our legend looks nice, it doesn't actually function at the moment. To make it work, we're going to have to use dashboard actions. In the dashboard menu, go to Actions, then Add Action, Highlight. In the Source Sheet section, check Legends only. Then in the Target Sheet, we'll make sure it only affects our line graph. Then in the Field section, we'll select the region as the field. Now when we click it, you can see it acts the same way as the default Tableau legend. Because our legend is a sheet, we can actually use dashboard actions to be super fancy. Let's change the highlight action to occur on hover. Now when we hover over one of these sections, it will highlight the line and show all the numbers. Now we can add another action for clicking to filter down the actual line. So go to Actions again and add a filter action, and we want it to run when we select the legend, and when we unselect it, we want to show all values, and we only want it to affect our line graph. Now you can see when I hover, it will highlight the line, and when I click, it will filter out the line, and when I unclick, it will show the entire graph. Thanks for watching. Now I hope you'll go out there and make some clean and dynamic line graphs. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and if you want me to show you how to do anything specific, feel free to leave a comment.